This time on Poll Hub, what's the deal with Kentucky? Okay, this is not going where you think it is. We did an extensive set of experiments polling Kentucky last year as the state prepared for a very competitive governor's race. We were looking to understand why some state polls, not ours, missed in 2016. And we have some really interesting findings that we are now ready to share. Plus, polling in the pandemic. The director of our survey center joins us to explain how we moved from in-person to remote polling in a matter of weeks. After this, we're going to let her sleep. So let's get to it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Depper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
I'm Lee Meringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion, and I'm in a serious mood today.
What does that mean?
It means the topic is coming up is a serious topic, and
I
want to treat it with the kind of seriousness that it deserves.
Well, so you're going to be seriously.
I will be seriously, and I'm also remotely. Oh, I broke that.
Okay, we've already done 2 puns in this serious podcast, so maybe that'll meet our quota. Hey, this is actually serious because in 2016, a lot of state polls, a lot of polling organizations doing state polls did miss. We were not among those, in part because we weren't in hyper-competitive states for a variety of reasons. We've talked about a lot of quality polls were in other states than maybe we thought we probably should have been because there was a lot of interest in is Arizona going to flip for Hillary Clinton and stuff like that? That being, a topic for another day and one that we've talked about. We wanted to find out why 2016, some of these state polls missed. There's been a lot of research in the field about that and some conclusions drawn, and we had some questions about whether those conclusions were entirely right. So, Barb, you directed this. What happened in Kentucky? What did we do in Kentucky? What did we set out to find in Kentucky? And what did we find?
Well, there was I think the focus of some of the misses that the state polls had, which you alluded to in 2016. There was, really a whole assessment by the polling community as to what happened. And starting probably with Nate Silver of 538, who did an analysis, state by state vote in 2016, he observed that there was a very, very strong relationship between someone's level of education, whether they had gotten a college degree or not, with their vote. So from that point on, and we've talked about it a lot here, and we've heard about it tons in the news and in columns and pundits. Education. Pollsters need to wait by education because there's somehow this shy Trump voter that does not have a college degree, that doesn't talk to pollsters, and that's what makes the polls biased. So that was the discussion that we walked into. I don't know, Lee, if you want to mention a little bit about the APOR study and committee you were a part of that also assessed that issue.
Yeah, and yes, I would. And I was on the committee, and a lot of people saw the results of the American Association of Public Opinion Research review of 2016 and trying to address the question, why were the polls wrong? And clearly the national polls were fine, as was ours. I think we were one of the, if not the closest in terms of what Hillary Clinton won in the popular vote. And as you indicate, our state polls were also good. And we, in that committee work, I took the position, obviously, from our vantage point, that there wasn't a shy Trump voter, because why would he exist in the state polls but not in the national polls?
No, the vice versa, in the national polls, but not in the state polls.
Yes, so the question becomes, it can't be one and not the other. You're talking to the same people. No, I think I was right, Barb, on that.
Oh, no, you were right.
We're going to check the tape.
You were right. The shy Trump voter didn't exist in the national polls, but did supposedly exist in the state polls.
And I think also a lot of it had to do with timing, and the timing had to do with, events that we know at the end from the exit poll, it moved Hillary's way. So on the one hand, the argument is the polls are wrong. On the other hand, it did move after the polls, and we know that. So anyway, I thought this Kentucky thing, which took us a lot of time and a lot of hard work, got at some interesting findings, and I think we should get, Barb, why don't you talk about the findings themselves?
So one of the things we did find was that education tended to be a clue, but not necessarily the solution that everybody wanted it to be. So that if you just waited or balanced your sample to adjust for education, that somehow we would now have accurate polling. In reviewing a lot of our polls, we decided, along with our partners, NBC News, to look at a race during the off-year election of 2019, which was the Kentucky governor's race, and see, well, can we parse out anything that might give us a better sense of what's going on in polling in states where there are a lot of Trump voters, and are they in fact shy and not talking to pollsters? What sorts of things can we do to try to understand what's going on in polling? So we looked at it. We looked at a couple things. We wanted to understand what was going on geographically in the state. So we went back to our other polls other state polls that we had done. And what we noticed was that actually after 2016, there had been some changes in sampling methodology. We had had some issues with the TCPA. We've talked about that on this program, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, where we had to hand dial cell phones. It made it much more expensive to do polls. So a lot of organizations, even good polling organizations doing scientific polling, were trying to figure out how can we make this a little cheaper, a little faster. And the one way you can do that is by contacting and using phone numbers that have already been identified as a household, as opposed to non-working numbers or businesses. And so we had always assumed that there wasn't really any difference between those households who were listed or we knew were households with those that we thought were just made up or randomly selected. And most of the scientific survey companies and organizations and colleges started adding this, what we call listed or enhanced samples, and phone numbers to their samples when they selected it. And in our study of Kentucky, during that Kentucky race, we actually tested out this idea of making our samples cheaper and faster, and whether it improved made no difference or made our samples less representative. And one of the major findings that we had in the Kentucky project, and I know this gets really into the weeds and it's really geeky, was that basically when we select households that are listed, that are known to be households with people in them as opposed to non-working numbers and businesses, we actually bias the sample slightly with people who are higher educated and higher income and tend to cluster in areas such as suburban areas and urban areas. So it wasn't so much that there was a shy Trump voter. What actually happened was that the samples became more suburban and more urban and started clustering, even in rural areas, around the areas.
Yeah, I was just gonna underscore that point, Bart, because I think it's very important that even in rural counties that have a more urban or suburban subpopulation, those folks might get picked to be in a sample more, and so the true rural people could be bypassed. And that was one of the things that I think this was really very important to uncover, but continue.
So we did this with our partners, NBC News. And, if you want to really get a sense of the conclusions in probably easier to understand language than my academic gobbledygook, you can go to the first read on their website, because Mark Murray, the senior political director, and Carrie Dan, political analyst, have both written about the project that we did. But the bottom line in all of this was that, one, we needed to keep geography in mind. And I think there are a lot of pollsters right now that are seeing that very significant difference in attitudes between rural, ex-urban, suburban, and urban voters. And this is if you look at things just demographically, So you may have a person who has the same demographic characteristics who lives in a rural area with the person who lives in a suburban area. But because they live in those different places, they have different attitudes. So fixing it by just balancing it by demography doesn't really do enough to make polls more representative. What does help make polls more representative is actually going back to really what is the old-fashioned random digit dialing sample, one where we don't really know whether we're calling a non-working number, a business, a household. And so when we do that and we don't enhance those samples to make them easier to get to people, we actually have a much better coverage of the state and a much more representative sample of the state.
So two things about this real quick. One is that just in layman's terms, what we were discovering is this new kind of phenomena, exurban, which are people in the broad out suburbs. We were missing them to some degree, and we were missing rural voters because we were counting the ones that were actually closer. They might be in rural, they might live on a farm, but they actually are much more like suburban people because they're so close in. The second thing is this applied. There were great polls that found in Indiana and Missouri and Tennessee in 2018 earlier in the cycle that there were problems, and this same problem.
And us included. That was one of the impetus of doing this was our 2018 Missouri sample.
So the other point is really more of a question. Does this apply everywhere, or is this something that applies to kind of Trumpish country? Maybe not Trump country, but Trumpish country, which is this industrial Midwest and Upper South, where some of the biggest changes from D to R have taken place.
Yeah, I think the answer I would take on this has to do with the nature of the state that you're dealing with. And I think that there were some studies after 2016 that went into New Hampshire and reweighted by education. And wow, silver bullet, it worked. Why? It's not a particularly diverse state. And so it didn't have that kind of problem that Barb has been talking about. So where the states are more diverse and there is this geographic and educational differentiation, that's the ones where you have to be very careful if you just have this one size fits all weight by education. It was a good answer for 2016, sort of.
In some states.
In some states, but we have to be very careful not to fight the last war here. And I would react to another thing that Barb said. I mean, this was one state that we did. We did Kentucky. We know that weighting by education has taken on, as Barb indicated, sort of like a religion among some pollsters. And it's sort of a yes or no if the poll is good. You weight by education or you don't. And we're saying it's much more, like Joe Lenski at Edison Research has said, it's much more complicated than that. And we're sort of calling out to, let's look at that. We expect to get a pretty heavy duty reaction from our colleagues. But the point we're trying to make is let's take a look at this issue and let's open up a dialogue. Let's open up the discussion, recognizing that this is a study that we did an experiment of one state in one election.
Right. I think it's important to note we didn't release these findings because we wanted to be able to let the election play out and find out where we were right or where we were wrong.
Although we did release them, and we worked with our partner NBC News. Prior to the election,
yeah.
They did have all the results of all our different models, all our different sampling models.
But we didn't release it publicly. That's what right.
Well, it would have been complex to put out 5 different models.
Got it.
And you mentioned Joe Lenski too. I just want to point out though that Edison Research was also one of our partners in this as well. So everybody saw the data prior to the governor's election in Kentucky.
Right. The other thing to point out about this, though, was that was an incredibly close and crazy election. This wasn't some like 10-point blowout. It was incredibly close. A Democrat won against a historically Republican, unpopular Republican opponent. And there were polls, quality polls, that didn't get it right. And you can't say they did it because it was weighted by education, but they didn't get it right. Some of them did get it closer to right. So I think it's important to put that context around what this election was. Again, it wasn't some 15 or 20 point blowout where, oh, we got the margin right. This was a hard one.
I think the reason why we did do well in 2016 was we had not made any changes to our samples at that point through the fall. We polled straight through the way we always do with our RDD samples. And so we didn't really see a problem in 2016 because we didn't have that, we hadn't made that change. However, going forward, in our 2018 state polling, we did see some discrepancies. And the main hint that we had was we created these heat maps of our sample, and then also of the people that we interviewed in those states, and compared them and said, okay, so where did the sample, where was the sample targeted? It should cover the entire state. And what we found was when we had added these, enhanced sample, we started clustering our sample towards urban areas, and then that was a very significant change that at least hinted as to the fact that there was more going on here than just a college, not college degree.
And let me close out the discussion for now, although I suspect we've opened a discussion more than close it. A quick shout out to our data person, Stephanie Calvano, who made all the heat maps and all that stuff and was swamped by this. But again, we hope to open up a dialogue by this process. This is an art form as well as a science, and we hope that we're advancing both in a collegial way. Because that's how we're going to make the products better for all of us. So I think this was one serious, as I said in the beginning, very serious attempt. I warned you, it was going to be very geeky today.
And if you want to geek out with us, there's a link in the show notes to the report, so you can take a look at what we have just been talking about.
Well, COVID has changed a lot of what we all do and how we do it. And certainly those of us who collect public opinion are not immune from a lot of those different changes. We, as you know, do telephone interviewing. And so the COSI, air quotes please, survey center with telephone interviewer is not exactly an option in this COVID-19 period. So how exactly do we do it? Well, we have with us Daniela Charter. She is our director of the Survey Center and Education Services at the Marist Poll. Welcome, Daniela.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you in the daylight, as opposed to the other hours when you are polling, which tend to be all hours of the day and night. So how are we going about doing this new style of interviewing in the COVID time?
Well, let me start by saying, typically at the Marist Poll, summers are a little more on the quiet side because all of our student interviewers go home. But this summer, it's a little different because we are now polling remotely. So we have a big gang polling with us. And again, polling remotely. So we are not all together in the phone room, but we are together online, and we've had to figure out the best way to do that we can all connect and work together. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of it. We're using some great tools. For instance, we use Microsoft Teams for everybody to communicate with one another. So if the interviewers need any help from our student coaches, which are our student supervisors, they have them right there with them the whole time, and then they can work together. And then we also were able to move using our software in the cloud now, and that's been super helpful as well, and allowed us to do almost exactly what we were doing in person remotely.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is that most people think of phone polling as people sitting in a phone room, and when they're in front of you and you've got the coaches and you can wander around, you can address problems and issues, anything that crops up. How is this different in that way? And is it more difficult to do?
I mean, we certainly thought it was going to be. I mean, I think the thought of it was much more daunting than it actually turned out to be. Again, as I mentioned, using things like Microsoft Teams, allowing the students to work closely with the student supervisors and the managers and myself. We're using Zoom, which I know a lot of people out there are using now, but we kind of hang out. I always joke that I'll be hanging out in Zoom all night if anybody wants to come and join me, but I'm there, and that way if students need to pop in and ask questions or student supervisors run into any issues, I'm there to help. So yeah, we're not together in person, but I think we're together as much as we can possibly be given the situation. And it's actually been a great way for the students to socialize.
Yeah, paint us a picture, Daniela, because when I first heard about this remote interviewing, I get the impression of kind of someone sitting in their living room, with closed captioning on their TV set, watching a movie, and dialing when they want to, and maybe or maybe not really talking to people. Can that happen?
No, not in our phone, and not in our virtual phone room. It certainly can't. We are monitoring.
So paint me a picture. What does it look like?
So it looks like one. Amazingly, we've had as many as 80 students dialing in one night. And with those 80 students dialing, we have a number of coaches, and what we refer to as our head coaches. That's a step above our student supervisors that work a little more closely with the managers. And they're broken up into teams, and they are working in the Microsoft Teams, and working in our virtual software in the cloud. And the supervisors are not only chatting with them constantly. I mean, for anybody we've had a couple people visit with us and watch the messages in Teams just going crazy because they're just constantly talking to one another, and they're joking, and they're not talking about right? What's happening with the phone calls. It's giving them again the chance to socialize, and they're sending each other little emojis and whatnot. So that's great. But also very, very importantly, the student supervisors are monitoring them, and they are not only listening to their calls, but they're able to watch their screens. So when we were on campus, we had dual monitors. They could be watching their screen. Obviously, they were be able to look right at them in person, but they're still able to do that. They're still able to see what's going on in their screen, and they're able to listen to the call as well. And as of yesterday, we have this wonderful function called Whisper, where if one of the interviewers is, struggling at all, having a difficult respondent or anything at all, the coach can then whisper to them without the respondent hearing and kind of help them along. And then there's another function that allows, if need be, for a supervisor to take over the call as well. So all these tools, they make it pretty easy. Like I said, something that seemed like it was going to be very daunting has turned out to not be that difficult at all.
Is there any difference to the scientific rigor of this versus the polling that we have done in the phone room?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, everything still applies. All the rules of standardized interviewing, the way they are conducting each and every one of the surveys doesn't change at all.
So this is not likely to end when school starts in 3 weeks. I mean, this is kind of a new normal for at least a while. What do you think of that? You've been running the Survey Center for a long time. What do you think of this being kind of the new normal for the foreseeable future?
Well, like everything else in life, things have changed, and we have to get used to them. So this is one of them, and I feel okay about it because it's been going really well, and including our trainings to how we're recruiting our students, we have found a way to do it all online. So even once we're back on campus, given social distancing requirements, we're not going to be able to bring all of the students we usually do into the phone room for quite some time. So this is definitely how it's going to be working for the foreseeable future. And I feel okay about it.
Thanks, Daniela. It's Daniela Charter. She's the director of our survey center and also a spokesperson for Microsoft Teams. Just kidding.
And that will do it. Well, maybe it won't really do it. Maybe it'll just begin the dialogue on some of the discussions that we've had during this podcast. But that is the edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of Marist College of Poughkeepsie, New York. We are all remote. College will be opening in a couple weeks. We're looking forward to seeing our students back on campus. In the meantime, as our Poll Hub is always done, Mary Griffith is our executive producer, and Casey Schaff is our editor, and Amelia Morel is our production assistant, and Hudson is way too large to be seen or heard, but we understand the wait is continuing, and little nips of people are occurring now.
Hudson has been a good boy, and who knows, we may hear him at some point on this podcast. But we also like to thank the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University, who provides us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades, and always compare what's happening now to what has happened in the past.
And if you have any questions, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll Facebook and Instagram. We've talked about the Academy online learning experience. You can go to that and learn all about the stuff that we've been talking about today. Well, not all about that. This is actually, that's advanced level stuff we talked about today, but you can get your 101, polling 101 by taking a look at the Marist Poll Academy. And if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, especially after like a super great in-depth conversation like this today, please consider leaving a review on the podcasting app of your choice. Positive reviews are great. You know, we all love that. But really what it does is it helps others find us. So if you like us and you think other people should like us too and should listen, that's a great way to help them find us. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe. And in the meantime, wherever you're at, be safe.